Chapter 37 The Espinosa Family October 12th, 2086 Orlando, Florida. A month and a half had gone by since Inez, Emmanuel, and Cassandra escaped from Cape Canaveral. The first week or so had been an incredible whirlwind. First and foremost, Inez came within seconds of dying during the escape itself. David Sepulveda had shot her with a Gauss pistol. The bullet entered Inez's upper torso near the base of her neck and got lodged in her shoulder blade. With mere minutes to spare, Emmanuel reached the group of Grey Phoenix fighters who infiltrated Canaveral. They treated Inez and kept her stable for the drive to Melbourne. Inez did not remember her stay in Melbourne very well. She spent most of her time at the local gene therapy clinic, either in surgery or recovering from it. She did remember being shown the bullet after it was extracted from her body. Then, about 2 weeks later, all 4 of the Wolverines came to see her. Still recovering from life-saving surgery, Inez was not able to hold a long conversation with them, but she was very glad to see them again. Sarah and Piper insisted on hugging Inez, which turned out to be painful but welcome all the same. Jay was very worried about Cassandra and spent a lot of time playing with her, teaching her a variety of games to play. Lawrence simply sat beside Inez's bed and held her hand. By the time Inez was allowed to leave the clinic, autumn was starting. Her left arm was in a sling, not because her arm was injured, but because her collarbone was broken and needed to be immobilized. The doctors told Inez she would need physical therapy to recover her mobility, and made arrangements for her to spend time at a much bigger and more well-equipped clinic in Orlando. Before leaving Melbourne, Inez got to spend one quality day of rest and relaxation with Cassandra and Emmanuel. The Espinosas and Wolverines drove through the wreckage of a town once known as India Atlantic and spent half the day just hanging out on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. Excited beyond all reason, Cassandra ran, fully clothed, into the ocean. Jay went in after her, and they were both buffeted about by waves, laughing all the while. Jay lifted Cassandra onto his shoulders and walked into deeper water. The young girl was so fired up that green lights flickered in her body, making her shimmer like sunlight on the water's surface. "Man, you can just tell Jay has a kid of his own," Sarah remarked. Inez sat down in the sand, cradling her arm, and turned to her father. "Speaking of kids," Inez started to say, "you've got some explaining to do. You said your DNA was combined with Vetu Kealoa to make Cassandra. So that means..." "That makes Cassandra your sister," Emmanuel finished. "Your half-sister, to be exact. Same father, different mother." Inez swallowed. She wanted to think about how this discovery would change the nature of her relationship with Cassandra, but Piper was feeling celebratory and gave Inez a hug while squealing. "When we get to Orlando, I'll take you to the Commerce Megaplex. We've got to get you, matching wristbands or something to celebrate," Piper said. Cradling her bandaged arm, Inez looked out into the ocean. Cassandra was riding on Jay's shoulders, cheerfully declaring herself to be a pirate queen and having a wonderful time all around. Yet, when the feeling of joy washed over the beach, it seemed to ignore Inez, leaving her to her own dark thoughts. Inez was now an older sibling. She had a half-sister. She should have been overjoyed. Inez knew that under any other situation, she would have reacted the same way as Piper, Sarah, Jay, and Cassandra herself. She should be happy. She should be asking Cassandra if she wanted to do all sorts of sisterly things like nail painting, hairdressing, or gossiping about cute boys on TV. Maybe Cassandra wanted to learn how to play guitar or ride a hoverboard. Inez knew how to do those things. She could teach her. But instead, a black cloud hung in the back of Inez's mind, tainting what otherwise would have been a joyous memory. Scarlett Freeman was dead. She died over 30 years ago, her place taken by the paradox. And Inez was her daughter, Akira's daughter. Akira, who provoked the Higaran-Bentusi War almost 4,000 years ago. Akira, who manipulated one Partogan queen after the next. Akira, who instigated the Levakian uprising and subsequent Battle of Auraki. Akira, who seduced Kyle Bradshaw into shooting at the US president. Akira, who safeguarded the original Stormbreakers during the siege of Hiroshima. Akira, who convinced the Reapers and progeny to betray Earth in the last war. Inez knew her mother, not by speaking to her, but from history books, documentaries, and memorial statues. Akira, the time traveler, who spent 100 eternities in a vain effort to create a tyrannical empire of man. Inez pulled her knees to her chest. Suddenly, the sunlight felt very cold. An idea was coming to the forefront of her mind, after having lurked in her subconscious for days. Akira Robinson was one of the most powerful scions in the galaxy, perhaps second only to Jericho. Inez knew that before the War in Heaven, it was common for psionic powers to be passed from parent to child. Inez felt as though she was finally solving a puzzle as many details all came together in her mind. Inez remembered how easily she allowed herself to be taken into her mother's world, the ISO, and beyond. At first, Inez thought she simply had the same aptitude for intelligence work as her mother. But then Akira strong-armed her into taking command of the Stellaris, purely because Inez retained a small amount of psionic sensitivity. Now, it was all starting to make sense. If Jericho had not attempted to destroy psionics 50 years ago, then Inez would almost certainly be gifted now. Inez would have inherited her mother's powers. In fact, who was to say she had not? Inez seemed to have a strong intuition about what people were feeling, stronger than most people even. Empathy was second nature to a telepath. Also, Inez was able to take care of herself in a fight long before joining the ISO or UN Navy. She never needed training. If someone were to come after her, Inez always relied on her instincts to escape the worst harm. She definitely got this from Akira. And finally, there was Inez's way with men. There was almost never a point in her life where Inez struggled to bewitch the opposite sex. In fact, a few women had even fallen into her orbit at one point or another. Akira seduced plenty of men in her time, possibly even Inez Espinosa, but Inez had no intention of asking him about that. No matter which way she looked at it, it was still the truth. Inez took after Akira in certain disturbing ways. She even went along with Akira's plan to blast Amadio with a psionic weapon, never showing a modicum of resistance. The darkest thoughts ran through Inez's mind. Maybe I'm the next paradox. But that question would have to wait. After a moment, a commotion caught Inez's attention. Loud gasps and cries of surprise came from the waterfront. Inez looked up. A very strange scene was playing out on the beach. While Inez was lost in her own brooding, two of the Wolverines were playing a game with Cassandra. The little girl was still riding on Jay's shoulders, and Jay was waiting in the seawater. Meanwhile, Sarah had clambered onto Lawrence's shoulders, and he carried her into the water. In moments, Sarah and Cassandra were playfully pushing and shoving at one another, each trying to knock the opponent into the sea. Piper and Emmanuel were watching from shore, cheering. While the game looked fun, it was lopsided. Sarah, a fully grown woman, easily overpowered little Cassandra. With one big shove, punctuated by laughter, Cassandra tumbled backwards off Jay and fell into the ocean. Instantly, Cassandra vanished from view. "Oh no!" Piper cried out from the shore. "Guys, I think the water is too deep for her out there!" The Wolverines quickly looked around for Cassandra, but they could not find her anywhere. Just as Piper feared, the water was deeper than Cassandra was tall. They started calling out for her, and Emmanuel waded into the sea, sweeping his hands through the waves. Inez stood up, ready to join the frantic search. She took one step toward the beach and was hit by an unexpected sensation, one that did not make sense in this context. This time, Inez did not need further prompting. She closed her eyes and focused on the psionic link between herself and Cassandra. Somewhere, very close by, Cassandra was having fun. With a deep popping sound, a bubble rose to the surface of the water not far from Jay. It was, by far and away, the largest bubble anyone had ever seen. The shiny sphere was so large it could have held a small child. As a matter of fact, it did. Cassandra, laughing hysterically, was rolling around inside of her giant bubble and occasionally gave it a push, looking a little like a hamster in a spinning wheel. Each time she was caught in the wave, the bubble was brought closer to shore, until finally, the giant bubble washed up on the beach. Instead of popping, like one would expect, the shimmering bubble around Cassandra simply vanished, depositing her in the shallow water. As Emmanuel and Piper pulled the young girl upright, Emmanuel looked up at Inez and said, I think that was a telekinetic shield." October 13th, 2086. Orlando, Florida. The next day was Sunday, so the Orlando Gene Therapy Clinic opened later in the morning than usual. After a long drive from the coast, Cassandra eagerly jumped out of the car and looked around at her new surroundings. Inez did the same. By this point, she had been told about the Gray Phoenix base hidden away in a starship graveyard, but no descriptions could do it justice. "You've got ships here from every era," Inez said. "I'm expecting to see a pre-war space shuttle or an Apollo lying around somewhere." "No Apollo, but we do have a piece of the International Space Station," said a voice behind her. Inez turned around and came face to face with shipbreaker Carfu and crew chief Magra, the mutons who ran the base. "Welcome to Orlando," Magra said. "We are very happy to hear of your extraction." "You're from Gray Phoenix?" Inez asked. "You're the people who've been infiltrating Canaveral?" Carfu nodded. "It's gotten very difficult to do so in the past few months, but yes. I hear you ran across one of our teams aboard the Charlemagne." "Yeah, that happened," Inez replied, nervously rubbing her head with her good hand. "Listen, my dad says he's been working with you. Do you know about the 200 children locked up in the Armstrong building?" "We are acutely aware of that situation," Carfu said. "Rest assured, a rescue plan is in the works. My compatriot and I are in communication with many allies." At this, there was a glint in Carfu's eye, almost as though she knew something Inez did not. Magra took over. "What you need right now, friend, is rest and a treatment for your injury. We told the local gene therapy clinic to expect you, and Great Phoenix will cover your costs. Go, repair your body, and we will talk again very soon. I expect you will want to play a role in the operation, and you will be given the chance." "In the meantime," Carfu said, "don't forget to turn on the nightly news tonight. It's going to be quite a show." The Orlando Gene Therapy Clinic marketed itself on a historical coincidence. Over 100 years ago, before the Second Hyperspace War, the area between Lake Winya and Lake Estelle was occupied by a hospital named Advent Health. During the war, the Advent Coalition bulldozed the hospital and built a gene therapy clinic on the site. Now, a century later, some of the clinic employees got the occasional laugh out of this little detail. The interior and exterior of the clinic were decorated with memorabilia of the bygone hospital, including pictures of long-dead employees and replicas of statues that once adorned the courtyard outside. Flying high on a flagpole was the American flag, but it looked very strange. When Inez, Emmanuel, and Cassandra arrived, Inez spent over a minute staring at the red, white, and blue banner before realizing what was wrong with it. "That flag is missing a star," Inez said, pointing up at the flagpole. "The US flag is supposed to have 51 stars, not 50. "Must be some intense nostalgia," Emmanuel said. "The US flag has had 51 stars my whole life." Inside, a group of clinic workers were expecting the Espinosa family and took them to meet with specialists. Inez was prescribed a physical therapy regimen to complete the repair work on her shoulder, while Cassandra's blood-red pills were taken away to be analyzed. "This girl doesn't exist in our records," the doctor explained. "We need to do a few tests to confirm her diagnosis." Cassandra was led into another room to have her blood drawn, leaving Emmanuel and Inez in a waiting room together. Inez grabbed a remote control and turned on a nearby television. The large flat screen took up an entire wall, and Inez flipped through several news stations before she found one she was familiar with. France 24 was following up on a news story that broke earlier. Inez was astounded, and her father was stunned into silence. According to the reporter, the following event occurred yesterday while Inez, Cassandra, and the others were playing on the beach. "Hello and welcome to France 24, the news reporter began. "My name is Jean-Paul Chouinard, reporting from Paris. If you are just joining us, France 24 is covering the recent military action that took place in the Alpha Centauri star system. At approximately 1100 hours local time, an alien starfleet entered the system and was confronted by spaceborne elements of the Armed Forces of the United Nations of Earth. Preliminary reports from the battlespace suggest casualties on both sides are extreme. At approximately 1530 local time, the UN Navy disengaged from the fight and withdrew to Proxima Centauri. The enemy remains in orbit of Terra Nova, and all contact has been lost with Yutaka Yamamoto University." Emmanuel let out a low whistle. "Sounds like a major defeat," he said. "I wonder." But before he could finish, the news reporter carried on. "Just 1 hour ago, we at France 24 received a notice from the representative of the UN Security Council, confirming earlier reports that Admiral Ingrid Siajotso was killed in action during the fighting above Terra Nova. Born and raised in the Republic of Madagascar, Siajotso was a rising star in the United Nations and a one-time candidate for the office of Secretary General during the 2071 selection process. Siajotso was a champion of the Earth First movement that swept our current Secretary General into power, and she was thought to be one of his closest allies. Political analysts are confident that the Security Council will announce her replacement at tonight's emergency session." The emergency session of the Security Council was called by the United Kingdom almost immediately after the first reports of combat were received here on Earth. In an earlier interview, French President Bonaparte expressed alarm after learning of reports that the Security Council may appoint Australian Sidney Beauclair to fill the now vacant post of Afune commander. President Bonaparte vowed to make use of France's veto power to prevent such an appointment. Emmanuel looked at his watch. "Looks like we've got a few hours left until the Security Council starts their meeting," he said. "Just enough time to get all of our business taken care of." A few minutes later, Cassandra came back. A doctor followed her with a new bottle of medicine. "She's a curious case, this one," the doctor said. "When we realized she was a Partogan human hybrid, we assumed she was suffering from the Fade." Inez shuddered. The Fade was a degenerative disease that only affected human-alien hybrids, and it was nearly always fatal. The doctor continued. "We had to dust off some very old books the Partogans left behind after the 2HW, he said. "We diagnosed Miss Espinosa with a chronic case of mamai. It is, it was an extremely common disease on the planet Partoga, about 500 years ago." Inez cocked her head to one side. "Wait, I'm confused," she said. "So are we," the doctor said with a smile. "It's fairly common knowledge in the medical community that the virus which causes mamai was eradicated some 300 years ago. The Partogans accomplished the task with a very aggressive vaccination program." "So how did Cassandra get sick if the virus is extinct?" Inez asked. "Mamai was extremely contagious," the doctor answered. "The virus was spread by touching the bodily fluids of an infected person. Blood, saliva, and so on. Transmission via sexual activity was also very common. Since she's a hybrid, the most logical assumption is that one of her parents passed along the virus during conception or birth. And that could explain..." Emmanuel held up a hand. "I hate to stop you there, but I don't think we need that explanation," he said. Inez knew he wanted to keep the circumstances of Cassandra's creation under wraps. Emmanuel asked for Cassandra's medicine and was given a new antiviral treatment. Then it was Inez's turn. She stepped into a private examination room and was told to wait. With a snort, Inez told herself that she needed to avoid being left alone with her own thoughts these days, since they always seemed to lead someplace dark. This time, Inez looked around the room and realized she was in an examination room meant for women only, and assumed this meant she was waiting for a female doctor to be assigned to her case. While she waited, Inez paced around the room, reading pamphlets about various women-only issues. With a nostalgic tug at the heartstrings, Inez realized she had read most of these pamphlets before. Back in the days when she worked at Binary Fusion, she and Opal would visit the Detroit Gene Therapy Clinic together. The doctors and nurses at that clinic had long since gotten used to dealing with people employed by the sex industry, and whenever Inez and Opal showed up for their checkups, there would always be pamphlets and booklets like these lying around. In fact, Inez spotted an advertisement for the very same birth control treatments she used to take. Seeing that ad got her thinking. Back at Binary, Inez took physical clients several times a week. These were the folks unsatisfied with the holographic experience and who would pay extra for a few hours with the real deal. Over the 5 years of her employment, Inez endured no less than 15 pregnancy scares. Opal beat her record with 17. In the moment, Inez did not think about these incidents more than needed. They were just a minor crisis, forgotten as soon as it passed. But you are Akira's daughter. The words hung in the back of Inez's mind like a monster. laying in wait. Inez, alone in this quiet room, had no choice but to finally confront a very dark realization. If I ever have kids of my own, they'll be her grandchildren. A creeping sense of doom seemed to grab Inez and hold her. Her hands were so sweaty, the birth control brochure fell out of her grip. Inez leaned against the wall, her mind racing. She imagined some distant future where she and some faceless man welcomed a screaming child into the world, only for all of society to reject the child as some kind of hellspawn. A monster tainted by its parentage. Then, a far worse scenario played out in her mind. Emmanuel said that Inez failed to become what her mother wanted her to be. What if Inez brought a child into the world who would then grow up to become the next paradox? Could Inez live with the responsibility, knowing she would be party to the creation of Akira's successor? Inez was so lost in her waking nightmare that she startled when the door opened. A Floridian woman, dressed in a similar uniform as the male doctors, stepped into the exam room with a clipboard in one hand and a tablet computer in the other. It took some doing and a little computer work of questionable ethics, but we were able to recover your medical records from the Detroit clinic, the doctor said. Now, I understand you've got a broken collarbone, side effect of single gunshot to the upper torso. Shall we get started? Yeah, Inez mumbled. She stooped down and recovered the birth control brochure. Placing it back on the table, Inez moved to sit down on the examining bed. The doctor paused to look at the paper before raising an eyebrow. Hold on a moment. I actually saw something about that on your record. You never picked up your resupply of birth control pills from the clinic in Detroit back in March of this year. Would you like me to order a new bottle for you? Inez opened her mouth to speak, hesitated, then looked at the doctor in the eyes and said, Actually, I was thinking about something permanent. Emmanuel and Cassandra were messing around with a deck of playing cards when Inez returned to the waiting room. She was carrying a manila folder that was stuffed full of paperwork. I have to fill out these documents and bring them to my next appointment, she explained quickly. Nothing serious, just medical history and a mental evaluation. You need all that for physical therapy? Emmanuel asked, raising an eyebrow. Inez raised her left hand and made a series of complex motions with her fingers. I can't play the guitar anymore, Inez said. I really wanted to teach Cassandra how to play, and I'll go mad if I can't. Right on cue, Cassandra threw down her royal flush, puffed out her cheeks, and said, I gotta learn guitar. Nezzy and I are gonna hit the road and be a band. We're a sister act now. Right now, the psionic link was a godsend. Inez made a mental note to thank Cassandra later. Upon returning to the Grey Phoenix base, Inez, Emmanuel, and Cassandra found all of the Wolverines and their new allies gathered in the conference room in the former Triple Alliance warship, Kakama. One by one, Inez introduced herself to the many people who the Wolverines brought together. She met shipbreaker Carfu and crew chief Magra, introduced herself to Jay's father Robert, and giggled as General Osmer and Colonel Sharp, one after the other, kissed her hand. Inez was beyond delighted to learn about several aliens who were here as well. Just like the humans, Corsair the Faceless and the local Andromedons were all committed to helping Inez rescue the 200 children held captive at Cape Canaveral. But the planning for said operation would have to wait. A projector screen was drawn across one wall and Emmanuel hooked up a projector, playing the evening news for everyone to see. Cassandra dragged her by the hand, and the trio sat down together. "This is going to be fascinating," said General Osmer. "My intelligence operatives report that the UN Navy is scattered and nothing lies between the enemy and Earth. In the face of yet another alien invasion, this could be the most important Security Council session of our lives." "Shush!" Piper hissed. "It's starting!" On the screen, a news reporter ducked his head to reveal the Security Council chamber in the Reichstag. The delegates from each member state filtered in and seated themselves at the horseshoe-shaped table, behind brass placards that revealed the names of their home countries. Former Secretary General Eric DeAngelis sat at the head of the table. As current President of the Council, he would lead the proceedings. "I call this emergency session of the United Nations Security Council to order," DeAngelis said. At once, the President of Russia began to speak. "Comrades, the first item on the agenda today is the recent tragedy that occurred in Alpha Centauri. The armed forces of..." While the Russian president spoke, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom stood up and began to talk over him. The British Deputy Prime Minister continued to speak, loudly, until the Russian leader gave up and stopped talking. "My friends, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland would like to propose a new agenda item for tonight's meeting, namely the re-election of our Secretary General, Pascal Etienne." "Seconded," called the Prime Minister of New Zealand. "We need to take stock of the situation." The Russian tried to regain control of the meeting. "Our next vote for Secretary General is in a few days if the British delegation cannot be patient." But the British delegation was not patient. One more time, the Deputy Prime Minister began to talk, raising his voice again to drown out the stubborn Russian leader. "Article 97 of the United Nations Charter clearly states that the Secretary General serves at the appointment of the General Assembly and recommendation of the Security Council. The events that have occurred over the past year have forced His Majesty's government in London to conclude that our recommendation of Pascal Etienne to a fourth term in office was a grave mistake. Secretary General Etienne's policies of advancing humanity at the cost of our alien allies threatens to make us a pariah on the galactic stage and an enemy of all spacefaring civilization. His Majesty's government cannot allow this to stand. It is with these thoughts in mind that we inform the Security Council of our intention to use our nation's veto power against any resolution that recommends Pascal Etienne to the General Assembly for a fourth term in office. The administration of Pascal Etienne must, for the good of this world and our species, come to an end."